Good evening, Dungeon Masters. I'm Baron de Ropp. Few monsters in D&D have as great an impact on a fantasy city's fishing and overseas trade as the Kraken. And in one of my most loved videos, The Geopolitics of Faerun, one of the most recurring comments I get is, "This makes a lot of sense until the Kraken show up," as if the Kraken is some kind of seaside destruction checkmate, which is only partially true. The most comparable example we have for how a society would react to the presence of a Kraken would be the Allied response to German U-boat wolf packs during World War II. These some 850 submarines patrolled the Atlantic, and over the course of the war sank roughly 2,800 ships carrying over 14 million tons of cargo. That's over 3 sunk ships per U-boat. The Allied strategy to deal with this problem over the course of the war advanced through a number of ideas. They started with assembling larger convoys of multiple ships to make each individual ship harder to target. Next, convoys were guarded with naval escorts, and eventually these escorts developed techniques that allowed the British Navy to take the fight directly to the U-boat themselves. And a similar chain of events would likely occur when dealing with the Kraken. The moment a Kraken makes its presence known along any major seaside trade route or fishing lane, it's extremely likely a convoy system would be set up to protect that shipping. These multi-ship convoys would offer some benefit in much the same way a herd of animals can easily outrun a predator. It's hard for that predator to isolate any single animal in the herd, even for an intelligent Kraken. Unfortunately, pivoting to a convoy system has its knock-on implications. A coastal city and the nearby towns that depend on this overseas commerce might rely on imported goods like grain or salted meats in exchange for their exported commodities, like copper or tin for making bronze. And this is why, for the sake of a starving population, trade just couldn't stop because of a total fear of the Kraken. However, trade would become much more expensive in the face of this danger. Shipments would become erratic in their timing, and thus markets would become far less predictable. The cost of the goods when they arrived would skyrocket, not just to cover the increased risk of sailing near a Kraken, but to deal with the possible onslaught of starving denizens rushing the docks and the cost of security to ensure each person receives a fair ration. With that said, if each city's authorities implemented some kind of rationing system, it's very likely a black market would begin operation for the illicit sale of higher quality grains, fruits, spices, and other decadent foodstuffs. The organizers of this black market would probably love that the Kraken is running amok. At any rate, increasing the number of ships who must sail within range of the Kraken's lair at a time is only the first line of defense. While convoys might increase the odds of each individual ship surviving by sailing clusters of too many ships for the Kraken to attack at once, the convoy system still might allow some ships to become targets. Therefore, the next logical step would be for the authorities who organize their navies to protect those convoys with their fleets. Ships like cogs, nars, or galleys would likely be outfitted with a number of ballista along their decks, and further, the ships with oars like galleys would be fit with spiked rams on their bow. Through the lens of 5th edition D&D, a wizard would likely be mustered with a detachment of 24 or so marines per warship. The mage would be on standby to enchant the ballista and rams with the spell Magic Weapon to overcome the Kraken's damage resistance to non-magical attacks, and then later abjure the marines while they operated the war machines. Equipped in such a way, the marines could fire chained harpoons at the beast, thus ensnaring it near the water's surface. This would allow other ships in the flotilla to ram the creature with those enchanted spiked rams. But the Kraken isn't stupid, and these deterrents are just deterrents. The Kraken would likely shift to hunting at night when possible, and waiting to harass smaller convoys. To truly solve the problem, these escorting warships will need to form hunting parties, specially trained and equipped for the purpose of killing the Kraken, perhaps even with a plucky band of adventurers on board. With the Navy's best and brightest sailors partnered with the Wizard College envoy, these Kraken-threatened societies would dispatch a specially made, robust fleet to take the fight directly to the Kraken itself. Firstly, a few specially trained Griffin riders might operate as scouts if the water is clear enough to see the Kraken below, who can signal to the hunting fleet the whereabouts of the Kraken. This effectively has them operating like reconnaissance planes. With the help of those mages, alchemical depth charges could be fashioned in ceramic pots, and the wizards might be able to ward off the worst of the Kraken's lair-inducing weather effects once the fleet makes their presence known to the Kraken. After the Kraken is somehow forced into a confrontation at the ocean's surface, the race to slay the beast begins as the creature's magical weather control attacks the ships with the hurricane-force winds and erratic temperature changes that switch between Arctic cold and blistering heat. But assuming a confrontation can be forced, wizards can banish the errant water elementals under the Kraken's command, and a flotilla of some 15 to 20 galleys and their crews can treat themselves to a buffet of endless fried calamari. The events that follow might be just as terrifying. At the end of World War II, every single belligerent nation's navy was in tatters, all of them except for the United States. After signing the various peace treaties that ended the war, the United States pushed for trade agreements and creation of organizations that allowed them to patrol the high seas, free of any other large-scale naval presence, all to ensure global trade access would be afforded to any nation that bought into this hegemonic system. These organizations would become the World Trade Order, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. And largely, the benefits of these organizations are quite obvious. Large-scale conflicts since World War II have been non-existent for 80 years, though the winds on that notion are regrettably starting to change. And poverty internationally has plummeted while access to food and education has greatly increased. Of course, there are critics that discuss how these boons have largely only impacted coastal nations, and all of this access to easy trade has caused a dilution of developing coastal cultures with Western ideas. However, it's easy to imagine a very different outcome in the hypothetical case of an Imperial Japanese naval victory at the end of World War II. Widespread slave labor and human rights abuses would have continued to be prevalent across the entirety of China, Korea, and the South Pacific Islands, and there would be minimal concern for the education and welfare of their subject populations. Further, large-scale conflict between Imperial Japan and the Soviet Union would have become a pressing issue very quickly. So, with all of that said, when an armada of Kraken hunting ships is built to withstand a frontal assault on a sea monster's lair, outfitted with the best ballistas and mangonels money can buy, and manned by expert sailors, marines, and battle mages from the most advanced coastal society on the high seas, what would they do after they win? As the old adage goes, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. These sailors and mages would be lauded as heroes in their hometowns for making regional sea trade and fishing safe again. And this experience would easily allow the authorities who dispatched them, especially the Mages College, to justify whatever larger-than-life goals they had, so long as it made use of their new powerful navy. Today's solutions are always the cause for tomorrow's problems. If you'd like to help me make more content like this in the future, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night. And don't get me started about the Chinese junks, people. They disassembled them, and they never saw combat. It wasn't a powerful navy.